not getting fired over this isn't enough. We need to be part of an active resistance pushing back, or we're going to get steamrolled on this thing. So freedom's not a spectator sport. We got to get involved in this process.
All righty, good evening. I'm Dr. Lee Merritt. I'm your host, and tonight we have a special guest, Mr. Robert Owens. He is a constitutional lawyer with the John Birch Society, jbs.org, and everyone asks me about mandates. Everyone asks about exemptions. So we're going to talk about exemptions, specifically the religious exemption. And Mr. Owens, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Doctor, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I heard you say, we were together down in Georgia, so I heard you say that you don't think the medical exemption is the way to go, that generally use the religious exemption. Is that your belief that it's going to work better?
Yeah, so, theoretically, you can use both, but the religious exemption is a little bit more robust. When you get into the medical exemption, potentially then you're opening yourself up to them being able to look at some of your medical history, and it's a little bit more dicey there, but the religious exemption is plenty robust, and I think that's strong enough to go with. So I'm definitely recommending people select that option. Again, if you can do both, that's fine, but definitely pursue the religious exemption.
Well, the problem, I think, with doing both is, first of all, when you do a medical exemption, I'll just tell you, any doctor who signs that is going to be a high target for the medical board. And I don't think people want to get their doctor. If you've got a doctor who's willing to do it, he's one of the good guys. Don't get him delicensed. So I think we don't want to do that. And the second thing is, I've heard employers say, well, if either one is denied, then you're dead. It's over.
That's just not legally accurate, and they'd be opening themselves up to, significant financial liability if they tried to pursue that.
Good.
Concept.
Well, so how do people go about this, or what do they do?
Yeah. So first of all, couple key things. One, don't quit your job, right? I mean, if your employer is issuing a mandate, if you quit your job, that's it. It's just over at that point. And, maybe it's a situation where you're ready to move on anyway, and that's fine. But if that's not the case, if you want to keep your job, you certainly can without taking the jab, but it's important that you don't quit. Second, pay attention to the technicalities of how exemptions need to be submitted. If your employer has a deadline, make sure to pay close attention to that. If they have a specific methodology under which you're to submit an exemption, whether it's through an electronic portal or to either your supervisor or the director of HR, whatever the case may be, it's important to follow those technical requirements. Also, it has to be in writing. So you can't just tell your manager, tell your HR person, hey, I've got a religious exemption. You have to actually put it in writing, and this is critical. And then you got to submit it. So that's the processes by which you then sort of get your religious exemption. Now, what we're seeing is that's not necessarily the end of the story, but it's a good starting point as to where things need to start.
Now, do you have an example? Don't you have an example on your Constitution Corner? How to write?
Yeah, so I actually wrote a series of articles for the New American magazine. So in our October 4th issue, we have specific, sample letters that you can use to sort of craft your own. And, there's some key things like, first, keep it just to the issues of the religious exemption, right? Don't throw in about all kinds of science stuff or medical stuff. That's not going to help you, and that's not what it's about. It's only about a religious exemption. It doesn't have to be a lengthy theological discussion. It can be, just a paragraph or two, and that's fine. And definitely keep it to that. going through the process. And the thing is, it doesn't even have to be necessarily Christian or Jewish or some recognized faith. I mean, under federal law, you can say, hey, on my way to work this morning, I started worshiping my cell phone, and the cell phone told me, don't get the jab, right? So, and that's good, right? I mean, under federal law, that works. So that's fine. The key thing is in the letter, it needs to have 4 magic words: sincerely held religious belief. Now, I know there's some people that say, well, shoot, we shouldn't have to have a sincerely held religious belief to get out of having to do these mandatory jabs. And philosophically, I agree. However, from a legal standpoint, if you put together a religious exemption and they deny you, it gives you access to legal fees as a statutory requirement. So if they deny your exemption and they do so improperly, then you can sue them, and there's a process for that, but you can sue them. But as part of that is recovery of all your legal fees. And outside of the religious exemption, maybe you can still sue them. Maybe you can be victorious, but you're not going to be able to recover your legal fees in the process. And that's the real big part of this, because it's not uncommon that we see situations where employees will recover, $15,000 or $20,000 plus reinstatement, but the legal fees will be $250,000 or $280,000. And that's why a lot of employers, once they have these mandatory, or once they have these religious exemption letters in place, they're really not going to push it too hard, because they know the financial liability they could have if they do.
Interesting. So, I keep seeing them push the date back because this is an experiment and the feds know they can't legally do this. So you think that's also happening with these organizations? They're just going to keep stalling and,
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Doctor. I mean, this is straight up bully tactics, right? At the end of the day, they know they're stuck with this religious exemption process, that there's nothing they can do about it. So a couple things that they're doing. One, they're creating situations, because if they deny you deny your exemption, or they're not reasonable with their accommodation, if they're saying, well, you've got to test every day and it's at your expense, or, anything along those lines, that's not a reasonable accommodation. So anything along those lines, if they go down that path, then you have to file with the EEOC. And there's usually both a state version and a federal version. You can file with both, but then they set the dates, way out. So you're at some distress going for that, or they'll start issuing you a bunch of questions, right, to sort of make you have to, answer a bunch of additional questions. And these are just straight up bully techniques. They're trying to get you to sort of back off and just give in. And the important thing to know is that if you exert a religious exemption, you're in the right. There's nothing they can do about it. At the end of the day, they're going to pay you for doing this, plus your damages. So like if you have to take out a loan to, float your monthly bills until you can get the hearing or get a result, the fees and the interest and all that kind of stuff, they're on the hook for all of that, right? The attorney's fees that are accrued, they're on the hook for all of that. So eventually you will be compensated, but they're going to try to bully you along the way. No doubt about it. Don't give up.
Is it true that when you're under an EEOC litigation issue, or you've made your complaint to the EEOC, that they won't fire you or can't fire you at that point?
Well, it's illegal for them to do so. I mean, will they, can they, they can do all kinds of crazy things, but it's illegal to do so. And if they do it, they're going to be on the hook financially. And part of the issues that come into play then is that a court can order them to restore you to your position. and they really can't do anything about it. And should they try to retaliate against you in some later date for exercising your rights, well, then you have a whole nother lawsuit on top of it. So if 3 months later you get passed over on a promotion, hey, that's a new lawsuit, and there's probably a lawyer that's interested in taking it because it's an opportunity to really write your own bill.
Wow. Now, you talked about, I know they have questions that they give you, they send back after you put in your letter, they send back what if there are questions, what if when you have to apply for this thing, there are questions attached to the application? How do you handle that? You still put in a letter, right?
Yeah, so you want to put in the letter to begin with, and you're going to use that and cling to it in the follow-up questions. And so it's really questionable as to whether or not they should even be legally allowed to ask any other questions. I can imagine that people are just going to write none ya, as in none ya business on all of these things. But I say let's be smart about it. Let's play the game as it were, but we'll play it smartly. So there's a basic list of questions that we're seeing, going forward. And so here's a couple things. And so people will know what questions they can expect and, an idea of how to answer them. So in follow-up, they'll say, please describe the nature of your objection to the COVID-19 vaccination requirement. And understand here that the goal is to try to get you talking, right? As a lawyer, whenever we're cross-examining somebody in a deposition, our basis is to just get the witness talking so that we can finally latch on to something and then drill down and grill them with it. So the key here is to say as little as is possible. Think about it this way. Think if you've had, you were out for dinner, you had 2 glasses of wine, you're on your way home and you just got pulled over by the police. Really, you want to say as little as is possible in this process, right? So for that first question, please describe the nature of your objection. Just write C attached, that's it, and attach your original letter. You don't have to add anything more to it, and it's not going to help you if you do. So the second question that we're seeing with regularity is, would complying with the COVID-19 vaccination requirement substantially burden your religious exercise? If so, please explain how. So the answer is yes, period, and then see attached letter. And that's it, right? Because again, more information is not going to help you on this thing. Next, they say, how long have you held the religious belief underlying your objection? I think you can say, look, I'm not willing to discuss, my religious practices in the past. Currently, this mandatory jab violates my sincerely held religious beliefs, right? And nothing more needs to be said. They're not allowed to ask you if you were Wiccan last week or anything like that, right? The key is, what is your sincerely held religious belief now? And that's the only relevant question that they have to ask. So they'll say, please describe whether you have received any other vaccines against any other diseases, and if so, what was the last time you got any type of vaccine? And the answer to that is, I'm not willing to waive medical privacy as to any other medications, and the mandatory shot, I've never had anything like it, right? And that's it, period. End of story. That's all that needs to be said there. Next, if you do not have a religious objection to the use of all vaccines, please explain why your objection is limited to particular vaccines. And again, you want to say, I have a current sincerely held religious belief in opposition to this vaccine mandate, and I'm not willing to waive medical privacy as to any other medications or medicine that I've taken in the past. Period. We're not going to get into it. They don't have a right to get into it. And again, saying anything is only going to hurt you in this process. That next they will say, if there are other medications or products that you do not use because of the religious belief underlying your objection, please identify them. Now, understand this is a trap question, right? And people need to be careful there. And what they're saying, what they're getting at is that a lot of people are exerting things on a pro-life basis because some of the cell lines were used either in the manufacture with regard to the Johnson & Johnson or in the testing phase with regard to the Moderna or the Pfizer jabs, that there were aborted fetal cell lines that are used there. And so they're trying to get at that because then they can show, well, see, your objection must not be sincere because look at Tums or Tylenol or whatever else, and they use these similar processes. So that's the trap that they're trying to get at. And so the answer is going to be very simple again. I'm not willing to waive medical privacy as to past medication, past medical conditions I have or other current medications that I take because they're not allowed to ask you about that. This is a issue of a sincerely held religious belief. It's not a medical questionnaire. They're not allowed to get into it there. And then lastly, they'll say, please provide any additional information that you think may be helpful in reviewing your request. Again, this is just sort of an opportunity, again, for them to try to get you talking so they can find some issue. So be careful. It's another trap. The answer is very simple. See attached letter, period. And that's it, right? And nothing further needs to be discussed at that point. People need to realize here, and in fact, there was a secret tape. There was a DOJ letter or audio of a conference where a DOJ lawyer named Marty Letterman, I think it was briefing Biden administration people about, all these people that are exerting religious exemptions and what they can do to try to counter that process. And, he starts going through some of these things that we just talked about, trying to trick and cajole and bully people into it. But one of the things he says that's important is he says, at the end of the day, if we don't shake them, right, on asking questions, or we don't find a way to sort of get them to come off of it voluntarily, there's nothing we can do about these religious exemptions. So they know it. Like they know they've got no room to maneuver here. And so this is all about bullying. And this is part of that sort of psychology. This is why these dates keep moving back, because at the end of the day, they know they can't really enforce it, right? But by continuing to make it an issue, they're going to stress people out to the point where they'll just say, all right, I'm just going to go get it because I'm tired of being under so much stress. So people just need to understand, stick to your guns. You're in the right. And know that at the end of the day, you're A, going to keep your job, or B, have a whopper of a lawsuit and they're going to be paying you a lot of damages. Now, again, that's not fun. And my heart goes out to people that are faced with these things. But, sometimes life requires us to have some courage, have some faith. And the bottom line is, and you're the expert on this. It's just not worth the health risks that are involved, because it's outrageous
right.
What this stuff is all about.
Right. And I think part of this whole, and I may sound a little crazy, but I'm not the only one saying this. Dr. Zelenko says this, and Peter McCullough. This is a genocidal extinction level event we're in. They really want to kill a bunch of us. And part of it, I think, is through the stress. There's a lot of stress-related death happening. And, psychiatric problems, suicides are way up, even in children. So I think they really, the mandates, the false mandates, because you're right, then legally, if they can't do this, it's got to be just a head fake. It's just sick through stress. And it's a lot of people are really, really don't know what to do. And I just keep telling them, it's just a psyop. They're not able to do this legally. And I keep hearing, oh, no, I'm a lawyer and that doesn't matter. They'll just do it. I don't really think they can this time. They can't. This isn't like some of the other things. This is a really bigger deal. And in the military, for sure. I mean, we've noticed in the military, they keep saying they're going to vaccinate all the military service tomorrow, but it never works. They keep pushing the thing back, pushing it back, because at least in the federal government, you have to have paperwork that shows it meets the requirements, and it doesn't. It's not approved. So, but even when this becomes approved, this still holds. What you're doing is still valid.
Yeah. And I think you're right, Doctor. There's a couple things. There's a total bait and switch going on because, there's claims that, there is an approved vaccine. That's not what's actually out on the marketplace. If you try to go get a vaccine today, really anywhere, you're not going to get the approved FDA full approval one. You're going to get the EUA version, and federal law clearly says that they can't make mandatory something that is issued under an EUA. I mean, it's not legally done as well. So there's that issue too. One other thing that I'll point out: this religious exemption is pursuant to federal law. So what that means is that applies in all 50 states and all U.S. territories, whether it's Puerto Rico or, the District of Columbia. So there's no such thing as there's no religious exemption anywhere in the United States, including all the states and the territories. Because it's federal law, but it does only apply in certain circumstances. So, in particular, if you're a W-2 employee, then it applies. Right. So that covers the vast majority of Americans. But for example, if it's a 1099 independent contractor, well, I mean, then it really doesn't apply. And so that's going to be a different sort of scenario and situation. Although for the most part, we're not really seeing that people are going to, mandate 1099 situations. And even then, there's still contract law. So, if you've got a contract for a 1099 type of relationship, well, I mean, they can't terminate you by adding terms to the contract that weren't originally in it. So there would be some defenses there as well.
Wow. So even in private business, any business, they can't discriminate on the basis of the religious belief. That's what this boils down to. That's the basis of federal law.
Yeah, exactly.
Because we hear that all the time. Oh, my business doesn't allow a religious exemption.
Yeah, that doesn't. Yeah. It's like saying, well, my state, we don't have the sunrise here. Well, yeah, you do.
Yeah. Somebody else makes sure that happens. That's not you. That's awesome. So where do you think this is going to go? What do you think? You think that there's going to be any kind of, how are they going to retaliate? Let's say 35, 40% of Americans claim a religious exemption and just don't do it.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, they're going to continue to move the post back further and further and further. And the reason being that if courts start ruling that these things are good and they sort of put things in a position where they're going to get tested in the courts on stuff that they're going to lose at, they're going to be all of a sudden the gig's up. Right. Yeah. And their bully tactics aren't going to come into play. So I think what they're going to do is if to the extent that they're going to have test cases, as it were, they're going to do that in situations where they've got a legal upper hand. I don't think they're going to make religious exemptions the first place to go. They might go after some medical exemptions. As you say, I think they'll probably go after doctors to have them lose licensure, those types of things. They'll find other creative ways to sort of make the first round of test cases so that they can, position themselves best. But I think at the end of the day, on religious exemptions, they'll find a way to keep saying the same thing, but moving that goal post back further and further. Kind of reminds me of, back when Muammar Gaddafi said, this is the line of death. Reagan would move a ship in there and he'd say, well, this is the new line of death. And Reagan would send another ship in. Well, this is the new line of death.
Yeah, that's right.
I think it's going to be something along those lines.
Oh my gosh. So if somebody's employer who's clueless says, well, then you're fired, what's your next move? What's the person's next move?
So first they're going to have to
right what you said to do.
Yeah. So first of all, you're going to have to file with the EEOC. That's a federal agency. I think for the most part, you can do that online. There's usually a state agency that is sort of a mirror to that at the state level. File on with both, right? And you're going to want to have copies of your paperwork. So, for the love of Pete, if you submit your paperwork, keep a copy of it at home.
Right.
Please keep a copy of it at home. Right? So you'll need to submit that paperwork. Before you can file a lawsuit, they have to go through an administrative finding on it that, you submitted it and that they terminated you anyway and they violated your rights. And then they give you what's called a private right to sue letter. At that point, it can go through the court process. But I would say file the complaint right away. Right away.
Right.
Then you're going to want to get in touch with local counsel. So there's two organizations that are litigating these things. And I think quite honestly, more than that, but two that I've personally talked to that seem well versed in this. One is called Liberty Counsel. They're out of Florida. Another is called Lex Rex Institute out of Liberty Counsel's out of Florida. Lex Rex Institute is out of California. Both of them are very gifted at what they do. They do these cases all the time. But you can also look at local lawyers that practice in the employment field as well, that have handled civil rights cases in the past. And there's a lot of lawyers that are interested in these cases because, as I say, for the lawyer, this is like the opportunity to write your own bill and you've got a deep pocket that'll pay it. Right? Because legal fees are a statutory requirement of these violations. So, if I'm a lawyer and if I can find a way to rack up, a $250,000 bill along the way on this case, well, you know what? That employer's paying every penny of it. So, hey, I'll be happy to take that case because that's big money. That's a nice payday when it's all said and done.
Now, when they tell you, well, you're fired, when you get that, so let's say I turn in all my stuff and then I get a letter of termination, or I'm told not to report to work the next day, which I assume you should write down everybody's name and who talked to you, but assuming they'll get you something on paper, do you tell them right then you're going to file with the EEOC?
Yeah, you certainly can. You can say, look, I don't accept that. I think that's an illegal termination and I'm going to, start filing claims. And if you're getting a hint that they're moving in that direction, you can even look to get legal counsel then, because what we're finding is that when employers get a letter from a lawyer saying, hey, I represent Mr. Smith, and he says that you're angling to fire him in violation of his constitutional rights. A lot of lawyers, or a lot of employers, what I'm hearing is 95% of the time, they back right off because they know the significant financial liability that comes into play as a result of that.
And that's for basically being fired over a religious exemption for being essential.
Yeah. And it's just overtly violating your constitutional rights. That's right.
Awesome. Wow. Well, that's really excellent, because so many people ask about this and about, now part of me wants to say, getting out of the mandate for you isn't going to save your children. So I still want people to stand up together at their employment. I guess that's my next question maybe is, let's suppose you've been talking with other people about how to resist this. Does that put you in any different legal category? Let's say they found out, Dr. So-and-so who works for this hospital and some nurses and some people that work for the hospital have all been meeting in Joe Blow's house, and they've been discussing how they're going to stand up against this. Does that put you in any kind of legal difficulty?
Yeah. So I mean, there isn't, a per se statutory right like there is with the Civil Rights Act. However, many states, I'm from Ohio, Ohio would be included in that, have, recognized causes of action for that type of thing. And, it's not unlike, a situation, you go back to the 60s, people are talking about, civil rights, and they're going to get fired for, involvement on things that have nothing to do with their employment, something they did off of company time on their own time. Yeah, I think if you get terminated for something along those lines, there's going to be additional legal repercussions that your employer is going to face. No question.
And that would also go through that also should be reported to the EEOC?
No, I think you probably, it depends on your state, right? And let me sort of preface it by saying, at that point, you would really want to talk to a lawyer in whatever state you're in as to the best methodology of going about and doing that. And the reason for that is different states have different rules, so you want to make sure you're careful about that.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, I really appreciate you coming on. Anything else you wanted to add to any of this? Anything about, tell us about how to find you. And I know you have lots of interesting stuff on your site. Tell us about your site.
Yeah, so I am a regional field director for the John Birch Society for more than 60 years. We have been, in essence, the intelligence agency for the liberty movement. We've had just unbelievable members over the course of the last 60 plus years. Our headquarters has the world's largest all-private research library and a team of researchers that help vet our information out and make sure that you're getting really solid information that you can rely upon. So check us out at jbs.org. If you're not currently a member of the John Birch Society, it takes like 2 minutes to join us right on our website. Along with that, you'll get 2 monthly issues of the New American Magazine, which has the absolute best information in the business, plus a members monthly bulletin. Plus, you'll be contacted by our network of full-time field staff officers around the country that help you get plugged in with like-minded patriots. Because we find, and I think you said it, that you mentioned it beforehand, Doctor, that it just not getting fired over this isn't enough. We need to be part of an active resistance pushing back, or we're going to get steamrolled on this thing. So freedom's not a spectator sport. We got to get involved in this process. And by joining up with us at the John Birch Society, we'll get you plugged into a seasoned, dedicated network of patriots that are going to play smart and do so in a way that would honor God along the process. We're not involved in any kind of, crazy stuff that is going to hurt families or hurt children. We believe that our activities should reflect and be pleasing to God along the process. So get involved at jbs.org. We've got great information, including videos by this really fantastic doctor named Dr. Merritt at thenewamerican.com. She's very knowledgeable, I'm told.
Well, it's so funny. Alex Newman who does a lot of your interviews. That's how I kind of got started with JBS, but I've just been so impressed by the organization. And, people don't know really the story, but I don't think, but John Birch was an Army captain, correct? And he was in China and watched what communism, as it swept across, as Mao and the communists are sweeping across China, what it was bringing to that nation. And he said, we can't let that happen in America. And isn't that the...
Yeah, so he was Captain Birch was actually first a Christian missionary that had gone over to China in 1940. And when World War II broke out for the United States with the surprise attack at Pearl Harbor, he was already in country over there. Now, China and Japan had been at war for a number of years already. So the indigenous Chinese were certainly friendly to him as an American, but specifically in April 1942, we launched something called the Doolittle Raids. There was a famous aviator named James Doolittle who loaded some bombers onto an aircraft carrier, snuck them into the Japanese home islands and bombed Tokyo. And then they had to just bail out over China and hope for the best. And the best ended up being this missionary named John Birch, who rescued them and then became an intelligence officer in the military and served out World War II in that capacity.
Right. Well, that's awesome. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on, and I really appreciate all your work. And they can find you at the jbs.org, and it's the Constitution Corner, right?
Yeah, so I've got a video series called The Constitution Corner. So if you go to jbs.org, on the top, there's a menu bar. There's one called Videos and Podcasts. If you put your cursor over that, it'll have a drop-down menu, and the selection is Constitution Corner. And it's got content along the lines of things that we've talked about tonight, and then a lot more, all from a constitutional perspective.
Awesome. And I want to say maybe the founder of the John Birch Society, wasn't he also a past president of the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons?
So we've had, oh yes, you know what? That's exactly right. I forgot Larry McDonald.
Great. Larry McDonald
was also, and he was chairman of the John Birch Society right after Mr. Welch.
Right. Oh, yeah, it was right after him. So, yeah. So, very good. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on. I know you have a lot of stuff to do with family tonight, but thanks for taking your time. And I know that people will appreciate this a lot. I think it's so useful. And I could only remember, I was trying to tell my husband about this because he's facing this too. And I said, the answer is always see attached letter, I think, but let's get the details.
That's right. Keep it simple. Anything, more information's not going to help you. It's just going to give them an opportunity to sort of try to knife in and confuse you and stress you out. So keep it simple and you'll be just fine.
And I think it's really nice for people to understand that the federal government's, the case law and everything is on your side.
Absolutely.
That's important.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again. Have a nice evening. And we appreciate everything you do.
All right. Hey, thanks so much, Dr. Merritt.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All righty. I stopped the recording.
All right. We're good.
Hey, good job. Thank you. I really, that's so clean and nice the way you do that. So
my pleasure. And thank you again for all the wonderful work that you're doing. And I'm told maybe we'll have an event in Ohio here in the next month or two.
Oh, nice. I know I'm going to Red Pill next. That's my, it's
okay.
Edward Griffith's 90th birthday.
Okay, good.
So they're going to have a pretty good party, I suspect, too.
Yeah. I had an opportunity, and I've met him a couple times, but we had a JBS Council dinner in Laguna Hills in 2019 and had an opportunity to chat with him for sort of a more extended period of time back then, and it was a lot of fun.
Nice. Yeah, he seems like an awesome guy. I zoomed in, and he asked me to do an ad for the Red Pill. So I did this. I started just chatting with him, and he made it into some ad, I guess. But good. Yeah, I couldn't believe. I didn't realize he was 90 years old. That's something else. He's something else. His mind is sharp. I mean, that's
He did a video. Well, I mean, he's a lifetime, longtime member of the John Birch Society. I mean, he was one of our PR people from like way back in the day. And he did a video about the John Birch Society. I think it's called "This is the John Birch Society," in which he gives a 2-hour, explanation of what's going on and why the John Birch Society is the answer. I mean, like, no cuts, one live take, and it's brilliant.
That's awesome. I have to watch that.
Yeah, there's and it's got a whole 60s sort of vibe to it too, which is great. It's totally vintage.
Yeah, and I was surprised. I learned from him that one of the biggest states of membership is New York.
Yeah.
I would have expected Iowa or Idaho or something, but no, New York, because they know the problem. They're surrounded by it. Yeah.
They absolutely know the problem. And now, have you seen his book, The Creature from Jekyll Island?
Yeah, I read that years ago.
Yeah. So all of that came out of our research archives.
I did not realize that. So that's up in Wisconsin, huh?
Yeah, in Wisconsin.
Now, can other people use it? Members?
Certainly. If you've got a project that you're working on and you want to use the archives, you can certainly talk to usually Christians. Probably Christian Gomez is the guy to talk to. And they'd be happy to have scholars and do that.
I'll tell you what I'm interested in, because I wrote an article a long time ago. It's on my website, but I'll just text you a copy. There a link, but it's the lessons of Karl Brandt, and he was Hitler's surgeon. He was at the end the chief medical officer of the Nazi regime, and I remember reading at the time, that a lot of stuff gets scrubbed. And I remember reading at the time somewhere that after the war and after the trial, the Nuremberg trial, that's what I forgot to ask you. I wanted to ask you if the Nuremberg trial had any legal standing in our courts, or if it's just everyone wants to cite the Nuremberg Code. And from my understanding, it's just a code of conduct.
That's right.
Legal. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah,
but anyway, what I read somewhere was Leo Alexander and the other two guys that were working on the prosecution afterwards wrote kind of an overview of what they learned from all this, and one of the things they said was, we should never let doctors, that this came about when doctors started working for the government. We should never let doctors work for the government again. I put that in the article. Everything else, it isn't one of those heavily footnoted articles, because it wasn't expected to be it was kind of like a commentary, but I got asked about that and I could not find the reference. I tore my own library apart. Whoa, we're losing things here. And I couldn't find it. And I thought maybe I could go up there, because I'd like to learn some more about that anyway. But that would be something I really would be interested in.
Yeah, and that's something that, Peter Rakowski is a brilliant kid. He's one of the researchers up there. So if you've got, a couple questions, if you don't have Peter's email, maybe shoot them to me and I can forward them on to Peter.
Awesome. Okay.
And he might be able to source some of those
maybe he could do
things for you.
Very good. Well, listen, I'll let you go. Thanks again. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Doctor.
Featured Monday.
Talk to you soon.
Hey, see ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.